This podcast is not safe for work and will feature movie spoilers. It will feature scenes described of a graphic nature. It will contain language which most listeners may find offensive. Welcome to the podcast Under the Stairs. Hi everyone and welcome to the podcast Under the Stairs. I'm your host Duncan. Welcome to the show. On this episode we conclude our 4-part series looking at my top 20 horror movies of 2023. There's already 3 other videos out there counting down numbers 20 through 16, 15 through 11 and 10 through 6. On this final episode, it's 5 through 1, and some people would say that this is probably the most important part of the list. So there's a good chance if a movie hasn't already been mentioned that you thought was stellar and worthy of contention in the top 20 list, it may be in this final section here. It might also not be. So remember, as always, I have seen what I have seen. There may be movies out there I haven't seen. So use the chat threads underneath this video or the Facebook group page, facebook.com/groups/teapotscast to input to me your thoughts on movies that you might think I probably should have seen, but it looks like I may have not. Now, as always with these videos, slight caveat at the beginning. These are movies released in the UK in 2023. If they've not been released in your territory within that time frame, I do apologise. I also get screeners of movies that show in other places as well, so chances are if the review I'm covering here is of a movie that was sent as a screener, i.e. in America, which hasn't made its way to the UK yet, then sorry about that as well. And lastly, if it played at a horror film festival that I attended and has had 0 distribution since, then that is also counted on my list. And once again, sorry for that. So, with all those things out the way, let's conclude this list, shall we? And we will do that by starting with number 5. Number 5 on the list is No One Will Save You. This is written and directed by Brian Duffield. The synopsis for this one is: an exiled, anxiety-ridden homebody must battle an alien who's found its way into her home. So yeah, and at number 5, No One Will Save You. This movie is currently on Hulu in the States, but by proxy of the way Hulu works in the UK, it's on Disney+, so you can go and check this one out. And it got quite a bit of buzz upon its release, I think mostly because, one, it was on Disney+, and they always seem to get, in the UK anyway, a bit of extra attention because of the fact that it's Disney+, and we expect Disney movies on there and not necessarily horror movies on there. So once you get over that, I think the fact that it kind of made its way directly there without any cinematic run, it was made for Hulu, I imagine, or certainly Hulu picked up the distribution for it. And I suppose the last big thing was the very nature of the movie. Now, as always, spoilers are in effect here, so I can't stress that enough. If you've not seen any of these movies, do your due diligence, go away, check them out in your own time, and then come back and listen to the reviews. I'll try where possible not to spoil too much of it, but at the same time details will come out. And specifically the big detail on this one is the lack thereof dialogue. So the movie itself plays pretty much as a dialogue-free movie. Now, I love that as a concept. There are movies in the past that have done that before. One of my favourite episodes of Inside Number 9, which is a TV show from part of the creators of the League of Gentlemen, I think it might have been the first ever episode, was a dialogue-free episode. So the kind of clever use of plot devices, character interactions, interruptions, can mask a lot of that, but in time you do expect a movie to have some dialogue or some description. This one doesn't really have that. It still has sound, still has music or interactions in such a way through television, etc., where things are being articulated over the radio, but this is a movie where no characters actually talk to each other. It's also a science fiction horror movie, so this is an alien abduction movie, if you will, which I've seen done before in the past, and to be honest, it's not my favourite. I do quite enjoy science fiction horror movies. I'm a big sci-fi kid at heart. I grew up with things like Star Trek, you know, for better or worse, Babylon 5, you know, like Lurks. I grew up with a ton of science fiction stuff, so I do like alien-y sort of things, even though I don't necessarily believe in aliens at all. As a concept, as a horror tool, as a device being taken by something that is fairly omnipotent to be used or experimented on, is quite a terrifying thing. Probably the same way that I don't like movies, well, should I say movies that are set in institutions, mental health institutions, hospitals, etc. also get under my skin. I think it's that relinquishing of control and power to something else. In the case of this one, these creatures are like super omnipotent, but they may have met their match in this character. I like the setup, I like the execution, the pacing of this movie is on point. It gives you downtime when you need to catch your breath, but speeds up and kind of throws you all the way through it. As a concept, I actually think this is fairly original in a genre which lacks originality. The dialogue thing was never an issue for me. I have read something somewhere that it feels a bit contrite after a while, but to me it actually worked really well. And the method that was put in place for the justification for the character not using dialogue, I thought also worked really well. So for me, that got 2 thumbs up. I think on top of that, I think what the movie has at its core is like a character that you can kind of sympathise with without really knowing the entire baggage. It's kind of portrayed out through various different like interactions, or her reading a letter or a glance at a picture. You start to get an idea of what's in the background. I know the ending doesn't work for some people. I've read that online. The ending to me was the cherry on top of the sundae. I loved the ending. I think it flipped a lot of preconceived conceptions of what these movies can or should do and gave me an ending which actually fell against the grain and totally worked. So yeah, No One Will Save You was one of those ones where I think the buzz that it got was completely justifiable. I think it is a great watch. I think if you haven't watched it yet, then please go and check it out. And for me, it was an easy number 5 inclusion on my list. So number 5, No One Will Save You. And at number 4...
¡Date, hija de puta!
¡Armando! ¡No lo hagas, espera! Por favor, no le dispare con un arma de fuego a la bestia. No vas a condenar, mi amor. Vamos a ser papás, no lo hagas, por favor. No,
¡Salí de acá! Date, hija de puta.
And at number 4 is When Evil Lurks. This one is written and directed by Damien Rugna. The synopsis for this one, as listed on IMDb, is: in a remote village, 2 brothers find a demon-infected man just about to give birth to evil itself. They decide to get rid of the body, only to end up unintentionally spreading chaos. When Evil Lurks, in at number 4. Available on Shudder, if you still get Shudder, and if Shudder's still putting out stuff by the time this video drops. The platform itself is undergoing a bit of a kick-in over the last year, mostly because support from AMC seems to have dried up with their reining back of streaming and content. But it's still putting out original material, just not at the same level. Plus, it now has competition. Things like Screambox are out there gobbling up as much intellectual property on the horror market as they can and putting that stuff out as well. So we're seeing how Shudder is coping with that. I think they still have like a degree of quality about them, like almost a Shudder stamp of quality on their films at release. And Damien Rugna's previous movie, Terrified, also played on Shudder. It's where most people saw it, and it made a lot of end of year lists because it was really, really, really good. It was dark, twisted, kind of nihilistic in parts, but also it kind of felt like, imagine what would happen if the dark, whimsical mind of Guillermo del Toro like like fed on a diet of steroids and then made a horror movie. In the case of this one, When Evil Lurks is much less fantasy driven and much more horror driven. It's playing with demonic possession, which is something prevalent in horror now since the days of The Exorcist and possibly before. So it's a well-told genre, a very difficult genre to make a good movie in, but Rugner does it, and he does it by almost circumventing expectations on what you think you would see in these sorts of movies. Rugner's great at world building. So in the case of this one, the world that you exist in is a world where possessions are fully known about, the locals know about it, the local government have agencies who deal with it, and that's the kind of ground level for you. Into that world steps two brothers who kind of shirk a lot of responsibility when faced with actual real world and real ramifications, and it plays out through not only their interactions but specifically on conversations the characters have, and the more you find out about their pasts, they're really only looking out for themselves for the most part. Even when they are trying to look out for others, it's with ulterior motives. I love so much about this movie. I think the pacing is absolutely excellent. I think the practical effects are absolutely phenomenal. I think the possession stuff just felt different from what I'd seen in this genre before. I think it has scenes that are stomach curdling, scenes that purely surprise and shock because you never saw them coming. They come from pure left field, and it has a proper dark ending, which I love in horror movies as well. I'm a guy who, like in the previous review, was talking about how I like things to circumvent expectations. I also kind of like things to go to places that are really dark and kind of leave the audience dealing with the ramifications of that afterwards. I think Rugner is a very exciting voice in horror cinema. I think he should have a lot more money flung at him. I think we should be doing a lot more to encourage him to make more horror movies. It's almost at this level 2 horror movies in that we're aware of in the wider kind of horror community that he's batting 100%. And I would love to see him take on more challenges, more genres, and put that kind of South American twist on them. But he's the real deal. He's an incredible filmmaker, and I look forward to seeing where he goes next. Maybe it'll be on Shudder, maybe Shudder won't exist. Who knows? So that was number 4 for me, When Evil Lurks. And let's talk about number 3, shall we? And at number 3 is Infinity Pool, written and directed by Brandon Cronenberg, son of the legendary master of horror David Cronenberg. The synopsis for this movie is listed on IMDb as James and M. Foster are enjoying an all-inclusive beach vacation in the fictional island of La Toca, when the fatal accident exposes the resort's perverse subculture and hedonistic tourism, reckless violence and surreal horrors. So, here we go, Infinity Pool, number 3 for me, the return of Brandon Cronenberg. His previous film, Possessor, was incredible to me, absolutely floored me. I try to remember, if it wasn't number 1 on my top 20 horror movies that year, it was number 2. So, like, very, very high for me. I think he's a great voice. I think he is an extension of his father, but actually more accessible extension of his father. He has all the clinical know-how of body horror, but does it in a way which doesn't feel as cold and sterile as David Cronenberg, a director who, by the way, I absolutely adore. In the case of this one, I thought this was a great example of a filmmaker taking risks with a bigger budget. So Possessor, his previous movie, a wonderful science fiction movie, dealt with time, it dealt with conflicts of identity, like almost on some level, you know, a manipulation of the person and the personality and the identity of self. I kind of played with all those things, and it just gave you a big old dose of bone-crushing body horror as well, and horrific practical effects. Infinity Pool is like the big screen Brandon Cronenberg come out party. It has Alexander Skarsgård and Mia Goth in the 2 lead roles, and the two of them play really well off each other. The idea, it fits in that weird genre of movies like Cheap Thrills or Would You Rather, where it kind of says, look at capitalism, look at elitism, look at wealth, and see how it exposes not the best of humanity, but actually our baser intentions are amplified for depravity, hedonism, violence, all these things. When you can pay to make consequences go away, the idea of how law no longer applies or ring fences us in to behave the way that society expects us to is then gone. Infinity Pool is a great example of that. Wickedly dark, like really, really, really dark. In this movie, when you commit a crime on this island, which is punishable by death, for a large sum of money, they will actually clone you to essentially die. And you can go on. And like Alexander Skarsgård's character, James, isn't a great guy, and we see how he has aspirations above his station, and how people above his station, quote unquote, I don't believe in stations, will chew you up and spit you out for your own enjoyment and entertainment. This has got some great practical effects, like jaw-dropping practical effects. It's trippy, it's weird. I saw this in a multiplex cinema, and that blows my mind. Like 10 years ago, you would never have seen a movie like this in a large multiplex cinema, but now here we are, where Brandon Cronenberg can just like launch a movie out there and we can all sit and enjoy it. Mia Goth was on a tear in 2023. We may or may not be talking about her shortly, but she continues to be a delight to watch, and really revels in roles that border a kind of almost method approach to insanity. And you can't take your eyes off her, but at the same time you want to take your eyes off her. I think this movie, and it was for a long portion of the year, my favourite horror movie of the year. I know some people have soured on it. Fine, it's not your list. It's my list, so I can say that. And at number 3, Infinity Pool comes in swinging. Oh, by the way, do not sleep on that soundtrack. It's synthwave-tastic. So, Infinity Pool, number 3. Let's talk about number 2.
I'm leaving soon. I can't stay here any longer. Howard was supposed to take me away. It'd be easier for me if I didn't feel like I was abandoning you. You understand that? I love you, Daddy, but this is no way to live.
And at number 2 is Peril, directed by Ty West and co-written by Ty West and Mia Goth. It is the sequel to X, which came out in 2022 via A24, as this film did as well. The synopsis for this one is listed on IMDb is: in 1918, a young woman on the brink of madness pursues stardom in a desperate attempt to escape the drudgery, isolation and lovelessness of life on her parents' farm. So I told you we were talking about Mia Goth again, and yeah, she's back in a lead role with Peril. Now, if you were in the States, this movie was released in 2022. If you were in the UK, you had to wait a long time for this movie, but it eventually made, I think it was about April time we finally got it, which is insane considering it played almost 6 months before in America, and was available on sites that are less reputable. And the fact I had the self-composure to not delve into that, hoping for the old A24 release in the UK, shows great fortitude on my side. Mia Goth returns reprising a role from X, but as a prequel version of that character. She will also, because it's been filmed, shot and being test screened at the moment, be returning in, I imagine, 2024 in the final instalment, which is a sequel to X set in the 80s called Maxine. This will round out the trilogy that Ty West apparently had planned for this one. I say apparently had planned, sometimes I get sceptical about this one, but he apparently had shot Peril around the same time as shooting X, so that was the plan. Also is the first movie that A24 has put out that has had a sequel, prequel, or whatever we want to call those. So yeah, it had a lot riding on it. X was a movie that I thought was absolutely brilliant. It was the return of Ty West after kind of a couple of years of obscurity in the horror genre, and he nailed it for me. Really, really, really did. I was curious about Pearl. It looked like it had a different feel, a different tone, and I wondered how that would land. And I shouldn't have actually wondered. Ty West is incredible at capturing the feel and vibe of a time, and he did that here, like, easily. I think the use of kind of the color palette of, like, kind of, it has a kind of almost Suspiria colour palette, even though it's kind of, it's obviously predates before that, but Suspiria, can't say that word, in itself was playing on things like Snow White of an era, that kind of Technicolor vibe, some garish colours, etc. And it has almost, it feels at times like it almost wants to break out and become a musical, which kind of just is, you know, it's kind of nuts, but it has this kind of flow and vibe about it that it could become that, and the idea of stardom kind of fits in with that. Pearl as a character, her disconnect in reality is that she thinks she is a star, and she thinks that all she needs is someone to see her qualities, and she will become the next big starlet that you will see on the big screen. She's a tragic character. Mia Goth is incredible in this movie. She basically carries it, and she carries it so ably that it's difficult not to think of what this woman couldn't do as an actress. I think there is no glass ceiling for her performances. She juxtaposes kind of the girl next door with absolute maniacal terror, and has, and there was a lot of talk about at the time, has one of the most bizarre ending credit sequences I've ever seen, which shows her commitment to the process. It doesn't give up the gore either. This one is surprisingly violent. It delivers the goods in a way that make me very, very, very happy, and a wonderfully weird experiment for A24 to allow a filmmaker to make like another installment of a movie that they put out, and it's now being followed. We talked about it in the previous episode. Talk to Me is getting a prequel, I believe, so they're kind of following that business model and moving it franchisable horror. But it, like, has made me think that if Maxine comes out and is half as good as the initial reviews are kind of stating it, this could be the best trilogy in horror. Like, I'm going out there and saying it. I think those first two installments are absolutely impeccable, and if they deliver the 80s version of the Maxine character with comparisons to Argento and New York Ripper Fulci, then by God, we're in for a good time, ladies and gents. We're in for a good time. Yeah, Ty West is back. Did he ever really properly go away? Some people maybe have soured on him. He went off and did TV. It was maybe not the greatest success in the world. He made a Western movie that apparently is very good. I've just never seen it yet. But he has returned with all the return of promise that we expected from him almost 2 decades ago, when his career was really kind of hitting its stride. So yeah, ladies and gents, it does me great privilege and pleasure to say number 2 on my list was Pearl, which means there is one movie less to discuss. This one is probably the most underseen of the movies on my list, and probably didn't even make your list. If you saw it, you will find out why that is. Here is my number 1.
You should stay.
You know I can't.
No.
Call me.
At number 1 on my list is Enys Men. This one is written and directed by Mark Duncan. The synopsis for this one: set in 1973 on an uninhabited island off the Cornish coast, a wildlife volunteer's daily observations of a rare flower turn into a metaphysical journey that forces her, as well as the viewer, to question what is real and what is a nightmare. So, little surprise to me, maybe some surprise to you, I don't know, you can never judge these things. Number 1 for me was Enys Men. I interviewed Mark Duncan earlier last year off the back of the physical release of this, so it would be about May, June time. But I'd seen this one in the cinema before with my good buddy Scott from Scott Liam vs. Evil and Jaws' Shite and Other Regrettable Outbursts. We both went to see it. We both came out. I was mesmerised by the whole experience. Scott was less mesmerised, but said that he enjoyed it, he just didn't know what he'd seen. On subsequent viewings of Enys Men, I still don't necessarily know I know what the movie's about, but it taps into my recollection of a time growing up, not in the Cornish coaster on an uninhabited island, but rather what television and movies were like when I was a kid. So I remember, like, vaguely remember, or vividly is probably the better word, not vaguely, because they're kind of bore into my brain now. Things like TV shows like Tales of the Unexpected, which played in the UK, which were all these bizarre short Roald Dahl stories adapted to TV that if you caught as a child at midnight when they played, well, just like scarred your childhood moving forward. Things like the Stone Tape, you know, like these things where you're kind of dealing with a kind of surrealist British interpretation of horror stories and science fiction, just became part of. There's a whole generation that were scarred by things that if you showed to the generation now just wouldn't do anything. And Enys Men captures that. It's shot all on like original film. It's mostly dialogue free, which is a theme here. It's beautifully scored, it's hauntingly shot, but it plays with the viewer's realization of space and time, events that may happen, will happen, or have happened, or may never happen. And it weaves it through in a narrative where I sat disconcerted pretty much all the way through this movie, and I didn't know why. It created an aura and atmosphere, and I was completely absorbed by the viewing. I had been subsequently absorbed by viewings at home on my giant TV, where I just feel like I'm in the movie with the main character. Now, Mark Jenkins has kind of built a stall of these kind of lo-fi productions now. His previous movie Bait did incredibly well, and I never saw it, but I wanted to, and I still will someday when I get time. When I get time, ladies and gents. So many movies to watch, so little time. But Enys Men hit like right on the button for me. Like everything about it just evoked a time period that I grew up that I found very unsettling. We see all the time on things like social media where someone posts, here are the advertisements I used to watch as a kid. Like if you grew up in the 70s and 80s, everything was dangerous. Everything could kill a child. Like everything was like at your own peril. And whereas you look at like old American ads, which are all like, here we go, we're going to the farm. Like, there's all these happy, like, let's go and get a can of Coca-Cola. It was all like cheery and happy, and this kind of an outlook on the world that showed promise and hope. In the UK, it was the other way around. It was everything could potentially kill you if you looked at it the wrong way. And I kind of think this movie fits into that. It's just surreal, bizarre, goes very dark. It goes very hard, but at no point does it overtly spell what it's trying to do, except unsettle. I was interested in talking to Mark Jenkins about this, and once again, go and check out that interview. It's on the feeds. Is that he himself, got absorbed by the project, and you can feel it in this one here. This is a collaborative effort where you just feel like we're trying new things out, we're experimenting with filmmaking, and that puts a lot of people off. A movie that doesn't necessarily tell you what it is or make great efforts to explain itself puts people off. A movie that overtly removes a lot of dialogue and kind of exists to the side of reality puts a lot of people off. So if you watched Enys Men and you thought it was boring, drab, dreary, incomprehensible, then I'm not going to argue with you. That's just how you experienced the movie. How I experienced the movie was, as a guy who's never done LSD, it was like the most horrific acid trip into bizarre off-road 70s culture that I never lived through but saw the effects of Yeah, I think Mark Jenkins is a really, really, really interesting filmmaker, and you never know what you're going to get from him. And I think he distilled a weird vibe better than maybe I've seen. This is like folk horror, but not folk horror. It's so bizarre to quantify, and we love our little boxes to say it's this, it's a slasher, it's a thriller. I don't know what this is, and that kind of excites me. I know it's rad. I absolutely loved it. It's number 1 on my list, and it's a movie that I will continue to watch from years from now, because of that timeless quality and just kind of sit back in awe of what he achieved. Enys Men was my number 1 horror movie of 2023. With that in mind, let's recap where we are 5 through 1. At number 5 on my list, No One Will Save You. At number 4, When Evil Lurks. Number 3 was Infinity Pool. Number 2, Peril. And number 1 on my list, and my favourite horror movie of 2023, Enys Men. And there you go, we made it to the end. We got this episode out on time as well, right at the end of the month. Podcast Under the Stairs will be returning very soon with more content. We're jumping straight into some Italian collection movies from 88 Films, now that I've got a nice little stockpile of movies that I can start to review through for you. So those will be the next episodes coming up. And look out for that Maniac Cop NPC series, which will be starting and hopefully concluding in February. Thanks for all the support. As always, if you're checking this video on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Leave comments in the bottom as well. Interact with me. If there's a movie that didn't make my 20 that you think I didn't see, please let me know what it is. I love to check out new content. So yeah, it would be great to hear what made your list. Did any of these movies make your list? If so, did you like them as much as me, or maybe less, or even more? Let me know. If you're checking this out on the Spotify's or the Anchor app, where you get both video and audio as individual feeds, then yeah, interact with me there. There's always a question that pops up at the end of the episode. Please answer that as well. And yeah, like and subscribe on those ones so you never miss an episode. And lastly, if you're checking this out as an audio podcast on any of the podcatchers out there, please subscribe. That way you get access to the I think we're over 1,300 episodes now in the feed, but also all the new content that's coming down the pipe in 2024. Thank you very much for following this series, for checking it out, and all the cool things that you guys do. But until the next time we speak, wherever you are, what the time zone is, and whatever you're up to in this big bad world of ours, please take care of yourselves out there. This is Duncan McLeish broadcasting live from Under the Stairs, and I am signing off.